We see Hollywood as a world of lights, cameras, and action, where only the glamorous succeed. But it's also a place where fatal mishaps can occur. In this video, we're telling the stories of 5 disturbing deaths on movie sets, each of them reminding us of the high risks that come with creating cinematic magic. On February 20th, 2014, Sarah Jones was a camera assistant working her first day on the set of Midnight Rider, a biopic about rock musician Gregg Allman. At 27 years old, Sarah was steadily breaking through in her industry. She had worked on multiple sets, such as the one of the smash hit TV series The Vampire Diaries. She was a cheerful person who never shied away from work. This would be her chance to work with some big names in the industry. But Sarah never got to finish her first day on set. That day, Sarah went to work knowing that something was a bit off. She'd spent the previous night talking to her father, a man called Richard Jones. During their phone conversation, Sarah told her father she was a bit nervous about the movie. There were several things bothering her. She was surprised to know that the movie was low budget, despite the fact that it had big names attached to it, such as actor William Hurt, who was playing Gregg Allman in the biopic. Moreover, Sarah made a comment about how some of the people asking her questions were supposed to be her superiors, and as such were supposed to know more than her. She found the whole thing odd, but it wasn't enough to deter her, not with her pristine work ethic. As such, she arrived at work and carefully followed director Randall Miller's instructions. They were filming a dream sequence near a 110-year-old bridge trestle over the Altamaha River in Wayne County, Georgia. The land was untamed and full of rivers. As the day progressed, the director decided to move the shoot. The cast and crew left the land beside the river and went to the trestle itself. They were planning to shoot a dream sequence with William Hurt as Gregg Allman on a heavy metal hospital bed on the railroad trestle above the river. Despite its age, the railroad was still in use, and possibly unbeknownst to a lot of crew members, CSX, the rail company, had asked the film's producers to move to another location. In other words, they were shooting the film on the trestle without the rail company's knowledge or permission. As you can imagine, things could become dangerous very quickly. Before the actual shooting of the scene began, the crew was told that in the event a train appeared, they would have 60 seconds to clear the tracks. A minute. That's what would make the difference between life and death. Hearing this, the crew became increasingly nervous. Some of them started a praying circle, but they kept working. They had a movie to shoot. Sarah Jones was everywhere that day. She helped load film, she monitored the cameras, and transported expensive equipment. The crew placed a twin-size metal-framed bed and mattress in the middle of the tracks. It was supposed to be an interesting dream sequence. Instead, it turned into a real-life nightmare. Soon after they placed the bed on the tracks, the crew heard a noise growing louder and louder. When they looked up, they saw a freight train hurtling toward them, its locomotive howling. 60 seconds. That's all the time they had to get away from the tracks. But in order to do so, they had to run in the direction the train was coming from. The director, Randall Miller, yelled at everyone to run, but Sarah Jones was diligent. She cared about her job. She stopped and hauled several bags of gear on each shoulder. She shouted, asking what to do about the camera equipment. Everybody yelled at her to drop it and run. In the meantime, other members of the crew, including the director, attempted to remove the metal bed from the tracks, fearing it could derail the approaching train and lead to a tragedy. However, their efforts were futile. The bed was too heavy, and the train was moving too quickly. When the train struck the bed and mattress with great force, it scattered debris. One piece of this debris struck Sarah Jones, who was attempting to find safety on the gangplank. The impact knocked her onto the tracks, and she was subsequently hit by the train, killing her instantly. Only her mangled body was left behind. Upon seeing Sarah's body, some members of the crew started screaming. The director cried. The crew was traumatized, but they helped collect Sarah's body until a team of paramedics arrived. Several members of the crew were also injured and needed serious medical attention. Director Randall Miller served 2 years in prison before going on probation for his part in the accident. The film's executive producer, Jay Sedrish, was initially sentenced to 10 years in prison, but his sentence was limited to probation with no jail time. Midnight Rider, the film, was never finished and released. Almost 1,000 people attended Sarah Jones's funeral. Her tragic death sparked Safety for Sarah, a campaign for increased safety in film production. It was October 21st, 2021. 42-year-old cinematographer Halyna Hutchins was working as the director of photography on the set of Rust, a Western film directed by Joel Souza and starring famous actor Alec Baldwin, who was also one of the film's producers. Halyna was an incredibly talented cinematographer, whose eye and visual style allowed her to work on several sets. She was regarded as someone who could handle any amount of pressure, possibly because of her childhood. Halyna was Ukrainian, and she grew up on a Soviet military base in the Arctic, where her father served with the Soviet Army. It was at the military base that she first became interested in film. She studied at the Kiev National University, and after that, she became a journalist working on documentary films. Her career in Hollywood started after she met her husband during a trip to the U.S. in 2005. Halyna then decided to move to the U.S., and the rest was history. In 2021, the couple also had a 9-year-old son. That Thursday, October 21st, 2021, Halyna was at work on the set of Rust near La Cienega, New Mexico. They were going to film a shootout scene inside a church, which could be tricky. As such, actor Alec Baldwin, who was the star of the scene, decided to rehearse before the actual thing. Halyna assisted him as he practiced a gun drawing technique. First Assistant Director David Halls handed Baldwin the gun he'd use in the scene, a Pieta .45 Colt revolver. As he did so, David Halls proclaimed "cold gun," a standard saying that let the crew know the gun didn't have live rounds. There was no reason for anyone to believe otherwise. After all, the set also had an armorer, a woman named Hannah Gutierrez Reed, who handled the guns and made sure everything was in order and safe. Despite this, there had been at least 2 incidents involving the guns before, and some of the crew didn't feel entirely comfortable. Alec Baldwin clutched the revolver as he talked to Halyna Hutchins. He explained the process, showing the director of photography what he was going to do. "So I guess I'm going to take this out, pull it, and go, bang," the actor said. As soon as he said bang, a lead bullet, a real bullet, ripped through Halyna's chest before finding its home in director Joel Souza's shoulder. Halyna fell backward. Terrified, crew members gathered around her. The woman locked eyes with the boom operator and said her last words ever, "That was no good, that was no good at all." Actor Alec Baldwin shouted in shock. Halyna Hutchins was rushed to the hospital, but she was pronounced dead hours later. How could something like this happen, and who was responsible? The world of film demanded answers. Almost a month after the incident, on November 17th, the film's script supervisor filed a civil suit accusing Baldwin of playing Russian roulette by pointing a Colt .45 revolver at Hutchins. A few days later, on December 2nd, the actor spoke out publicly in an interview, saying he had no idea how a live bullet got onto the set. Baldwin's status as one of the film's producers meant some people believed him at least partially responsible for the lack of safety on set. Halyna's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit in February 2022. According to the suit, Halyna died because of reckless behavior and cost-cutting by Baldwin and others. The family announced they'd reached a settlement in their lawsuit on October 5, 2022. In November, Baldwin himself sued the film's armorer, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, as well as several other crew members for negligence. The actor himself was formally charged with involuntary manslaughter in January 2023, alongside the film's armorer. He pleaded not guilty, and the charges against him were dismissed in the spring of 2023, only to be indicted on a new involuntary manslaughter charge in January 2024. He once again pleaded not guilty. The film's armorer, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 18 months in prison in March 2024. Alec Baldwin is scheduled for trial on July 9, 2024. It was July 23, 1982. The moon hung low over Indian Dunes, casting a ghostly glow on the sprawling landscape of Valencia, California. The location, a favorite for filmmakers throughout the 1980s, had seen its fair share of action, from the adventures of MacGyver to the drama of China Beach. But on this fateful night, it was the set of Twilight Zone the movie that transformed the quiet ranch into a scene of unspeakable tragedy. It was late at night, but the set was filled with crew members. 31-year-old John Landis, who had previously directed Animal House and An American Werewolf in London, was directing his film with his usual iron fist. It was no wonder everyone was on set. The night scene called for actor Vic Morrow to carry two young children, 7-year-old Micah Din Lei and 6-year-old Renee Xin-Yi Chen, out of a war-torn village and across a shallow river. At 53 years old, Vic Morrow was already a seasoned actor with an impressive portfolio of films. The children, however, weren't actors. In fact, they weren't even supposed to be on the set. Landis, the film's director, was violating California's child labor laws by having Micah and Ren there without the required permits, filming at such a late hour. This was also the reason why both Micah and Renee were being paid under the table. The scene was going to be a violent one. The script demanded intensity, with explosions and a hovering helicopter adding to the chaos. Vic Morrow was playing Bill Connor, a man who gets transported back in time to the Vietnam War, where he becomes a Vietnamese man desperately trying to protect two children from American soldiers. The helicopter, piloted by Vietnam War veteran Dorsey Wingo, was a key element in creating the sense of danger and urgency. And there were going to be some big explosions, despite the fact that the children's parents weren't aware of this not-so-small detail. Hovering at about 25 feet from the ground, the helicopter moved into position. Morrow, cradling the children, was supposed to heroically make his way through the river. The make-believe village behind the actors erupted into controlled flames, and Morrow started waddling through the river, carrying the two small children in his arms. It was meant to be a moment of cinematic brilliance, but instead, it became a nightmare. As Wingo maneuvered the helicopter, a large mortar effect detonated below, sending debris and a metal lid hurtling into the tail rotor. The rotor, crucial for stabilizing the aircraft, shattered upon impact. The pilot was scared out of his mind, but he was new in the business and didn't want to disrupt the shoot. He barely moved as the helicopter began to spin uncontrollably. Vic Morrow allegedly believed he was going to die in a helicopter crash. Down below, the actor had just dropped Renee. Micah was still in his arms when the out-of-control helicopter plummeted towards them. The main rotor blades struck Morrow and Micah, slicing through them. Renee was crushed by the helicopter's right landing skid. In a heartbeat, all 3 lives were extinguished. The chaos and noise of the set were replaced by an eerie silence as the reality of what had happened settled over the stunned crew. Then Renee's mother started screaming, breaking the horrible spell. A real-life tragedy was unfolding in front of them. The pilot survived miraculously. Law enforcement arrived on scene just before dawn. The aftermath was a whirlwind of investigations and courtrooms. At the trial, it was revealed that the pilot, upon seeing the explosions, had tried to steer clear, only to lose control completely. Production manager Dan Allingham had sensed the danger and called for a break, but director John Landis insisted the helicopter got lower and lower. Stephen Lydecker, another camera operator, testified about Landis's cavalier attitude towards the stunt's risks. He recounted a chilling remark made by Landis: "We may lose the helicopter." Lydecker, as well as many others, believed Landis's dismissive attitude was to blame for the tragedy. The legal battles raged for over a decade. Landis, along with 4 others, faced charges of manslaughter but were ultimately acquitted. In a 1996 interview, Landis said the tragedy, which he thought about every day, had an enormous impact on his career, from which he might possibly never recover. On March 30th, 1993, Brandon Lee was filming one of his last scenes as Eric Draven, the main character of The Crow. At 28 years old, Brandon was a rising star and the heir to a huge legacy. He was the son of the legendary actor Bruce Lee. Brandon had inherited not only his father's martial arts prowess, but also his magnetic screen presence. The Crow, a dark and moody supernatural thriller, was meant to be his breakout role, the film that would launch him to stardom. But fate had a different, tragic plan. That evening, Brandon was preparing to film a scene where his character, Eric Draven, is brutally murdered by a gang of thugs. The scene was intense, demanding, and filled with raw emotion. The night before, while talking to his mother on the phone, Brandon told her he was happy about getting to film his last scene that involved weapons. He was ready for something new and was looking forward to his next project. As the cameras rolled that Tuesday, March 30th, 1993, Brandon's character, Eric Draven, walked into his apartment to find his fiancée being assaulted. In the chaos, a thug, played by Michael Massey, aimed a Smith & Wesson model 629-44 Magnum revolver at Brandon and pulled the trigger just as the scene was supposed to go. Earlier, the gun had been loaded with dummy rounds, real cartridges with the powder removed, leaving the primer intact. These rounds were designed to look real on camera without posing a danger. However, the crew had neglected a critical step, removing the primer. During a previous scene, one of these rounds was fired, and although it had no powder charge, the primer's energy was enough to lodge the bullet partway into the barrel, creating a dangerous squib load. For the fatal scene, the dummy rounds were swapped out for blanks, which are designed to produce the sound and flash of a gunshot without a projectile. But the lodged bullet was still in the barrel, unnoticed by the crew. By the time the crew started shooting, the film's armorer had already left for the day, considering that all was well. But all was not well. When Massey fired the blank round, the force propelled the lodged bullet forward, striking Brandon in the abdomen with almost the same force as a live round. The bullet sliced through Brandon. There was no blood as he fell. In fact, when the director called cut and Brandon remained on the floor, everybody assumed he was pulling a prank. Brandon was known for his sense of humor, so a prank wasn't out of the question. But he remained on the floor, unmoving. Jeff Amata, a fellow actor and friend, rushed to check on Brandon and quickly realized something was terribly wrong. Brandon Lee was unconscious and struggling to breathe. A medic was called. At first, the man shook Brandon, thinking maybe the actor had hit his head in the fall. Again, there was no visible bleeding, and Brandon's pulse was regular, at least at first. Within minutes, though, his pulse slowed dramatically. Then it stopped. The cruel reality set in, and Brandon was rushed to New Hanover Regional Medical Center. After 6 hours of surgery, Brandon Lee died in the early hours of Wednesday, March 31, 1993. The shooting was ruled an accident due to negligence. Brandon was laid to rest next to his father at Lakeview Cemetery in Seattle, Washington. In the wake of the tragedy, Brandon's mother, Linda Lee Cadwell, filed a lawsuit against the filmmakers alleging negligence. The suit was settled out of court. The Crow was eventually released and is now considered a cult classic with a devoted fan base. It was September 24, 2007, and Conway Wycliffe, a New Zealand-born special effects technician, was working on the set of Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. Conway was 41 years old and had an impressive career, having worked on big-budget hits such as Batman Begins, Children of Men, and Casino Royale. His passion for his craft had taken him across the globe to work on some of the biggest blockbusters of his time. And now he was in Chertsey, Surrey, ready to make his contribution to what would become one of the most popular films of the late 2000s. That day, Conway was leaning out of the window of a 4WD Nissan, facing backward to capture the perfect shot of the stunt car. The vehicle he was in was driven by a man named Bruce Monroe Armstrong. The plan was simple: film the Batmobile as it sped parallel to their own vehicle, capturing the intensity and the epicness of the moment. As they approached a bend, the situation took a tragic turn. The Nissan veered slightly off course, clipping a bank before colliding with a tree. The impact, though at a relatively low speed of about 19 miles per hour, was severe enough to cause catastrophic damage. Conway didn't have his seatbelt on. Even more, his head was hanging out of the open window at the moment of the impact. As a result, his head got crushed between the tree and the car. His injuries were fatal. Fellow crew member Ian Mitchell watched in horror as the Ford WD failed to turn onto the service road and instead continued into the grass, ultimately striking the tree. He rushed over to find Conway in a dire state, and calls for a medic were immediately made, echoing throughout the set. Despite their efforts, Conway was pronounced dead at the scene. Christopher Corbould, the special effects supervisor, faced scrutiny over the incident, but a court ultimately ruled Conway's death as an accident. In memory of Conway Wycliffe, the final credits of The Dark Knight read, "In memory of our friends Heath Ledger and Conway Wycliffe, a poignant reminder of the fragile line between life and art.